Welcome to season 13 of the XTraw AI podcast, where we dive deep into the raw, unfiltered world of artificial intelligence, its breakthroughs, its impact, and the bold ideas driving tomorrow's transformation. I'm your host, Raghu Banda, and I'm thrilled to kick off this new season with a topic that's on everyone's mind. From boardrooms to city halls to everyday citizens, can AI help build a smarter, more efficient government? Can it transform how policies are shaped and services are delivered? Today, we step into that critical conversation with none other than Tommy Esposito, a thought leader at the intersection of economic policy, public sector innovation, and AI-driven transformation. Tommy has recently been making waves on LinkedIn with his powerful commentaries on inflation, fiscal deficits, and a rising star in government reform. The Department of Government Efficiency, or D.O.G.E. He brings a rare blend of data literacy, policy pragmatism, and AI advocacy, making him the perfect guest to explore this season's opening theme. Together, we'll unpack how governments can use AI to reduce inefficiencies, what role AI plays in analyzing economic signals like inflation and debt, and what the future of public administration could look like in an AI-powered world. So grab your coffee, get comfy, and let's dive into this season premiere of XTraw AI. It's time to ask the hard questions and imagine bold answers. Let's go.
Today we are welcome back to XTraw AI, our podcast series on AI and machine learning applications. And today we have an interesting topic that we are going to discuss. And today the topic is around how do we leverage AI for D.O.G.E, or the famous term which is very hot nowadays, Department of Government Efficiency. And I have with me Tommy Esposito. Tommy has a wealth of experience in economic analysis, government policy, and AI-driven efficiencies in public sector operations, and so on and so forth. Welcome on board, Tommy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
So maybe can you give us a bit of a background about how your work intersects with maybe AI, economic policy, and government efficiency, all the interesting terms or all the things that are going on nowadays?
Sure. I'll give you a brief intro. So my background is largely in banking. So most of my career, starting from right out of college, was retail banking was where I got my start. Literally, my very first job was I was a collector on past due credit card consolidation loans. It was a brutal thing to call people who were 3 months past due on their loans, trying to get them to make a payment when they didn't have the money. So that was the start of my banking career. So I started at the bottom, I would say, really, and worked my way up from there. And my career has been pretty wide ranging. So I started in like the retail area in a credit function. So first I did collections, then I did credit, and then I got into a little bit of reporting and became an Excel nerd. And I got into doing like reporting for a marketing team, and it was all in Excel, and I started writing code. I was a history major in college, and I just go wherever things got, interesting. And had a sponsor who kind of picked me up from my spot and said, let's bring you into finance, because if you like Excel, why don't you try some forecasting? Why don't you try some financial modeling? And that became sort of my lingua franca. It just like took over my life. I loved the patterns of modeling these trends and things, and began to see it like a sheet of music, if you will. Right. So all of this is related to your question, which is economics. So what I got really good at was predicting the future, essentially, by looking at financial trends in the past in different banking loan portfolios, and was able to see based on past patterns where things were going to head based on different economic indicators. So I got into the business of building models to do that. And it started with simple, any credit card people out there will know what I mean by roll rate models. But I also built, an integrated PD and LGD models. That's probability of default and loss given default models, which were big when Basel II became a thing in the banking world after, some financial regulations changed, after the 90s. And that led me into yet another opportunity, which was I switched jobs and went to an internet bank called ING Direct, which was a famous, one of the early adopters of internet-based marketing and technology and interfacing with clients. And it was a rocket ship, it was like working in Silicon Valley. It was just incredible. I joined, it was like 50 employees, and about 10 billion in assets. And when I left, it was, we had gone bust in 2008 and had 90 billion in assets, and a lot of underwater bonds that were, they basically had been downgraded and devalued, which ate into our equity. And I could do a whole podcast just on what happened at ING. But my point is that situation led me into the treasury world. So I have a background that's very diverse in the banking world. So I had a credit, financial planning, then finance, and then, treasury and risk management and treasury. Things like asset liability models, modeling, again, related to modeling and finding those patterns, just increasingly sophisticated models where I'm trying to predict the future of prepayments in mortgage portfolios, right? So all of this is kind of related to my, let's say, my understanding of the impact of different financial trends and market trends on GDP and on unemployment, because all of those types of macro indicators move and shake investment portfolios, obviously, but also loan portfolios, people's ability to make their payments on their loans, and so on. And because of my banking background, of course, we all tend to be a little bit biased in our thinking based on our backgrounds. So for me, I'm always looking at the world through the lens of how does this affect banks? Right. Because banks are, in my opinion, the lifeblood of capitalism. And most of the money in our system is created through banks, right? And what we saw, and to bring it back to the AI point and to automation and that kind of thing, there's this trend since 2008. Because interest rates were so low, it became very difficult for banks to make money. So every quarter, nearly anyone in the banking world was experiencing every quarter end that there would be headcount cuts. And it didn't matter what bank you worked at. It just became a fact of life for us. And so I moved around a lot in that period post 08 because I was trying to run away from losing my job. Right. That would be another, here's another one. They had a bad quarter. They're looking to cut heads, and I would just take the call when somebody called until finally my ticket came up in the September of 2020. September 2020 was probably one of the worst times to lose your job, but I did. My ticket came up finally. And I know there's a lot of guys out there that have had this happen. And it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened in my career because it just freed me from that kind of corporate thinking. And I got into consulting, and that's what I'm doing now. I was consulting with community banks, financial consulting, doing the credit risks, the treasury risk, ALM stuff that I know for community banks. And now I work doing financial consulting for hospital systems. Again, similar things, asset and liability management, cash management, and liquidity planning and things like that. And one of the things that I think is truly interesting in the financial markets is everybody is trying to figure out what this whole AI thing can do, and a lot of people, let's be honest, Raghu, is in my generation, Generation X, those of us who grew up here,
Right.
there were a lot of movies
Right.
that came out when we were kids, like Terminator, right?
Right. Right.
Like The Matrix, that were
Right.
extremely popular films that were like flashing warnings. Even 2001, A Space Odyssey, the famous film from the 60s,
Right.
flashing these huge warnings about artificial intelligence is bad, and look out, they're going to take over the world and we won't. So I think that the first reaction of many people, many Americans, is of concern and fear over this. Now, I don't feel that way personally. I can get into why, but I think that's something that is still kind of lingering out there that, at least in this country, will have to be overcome, because I think there's just a sort of a gut reaction of The Matrix, Terminator, like people get scared fast and they think they're going to lose their jobs and their livelihoods because of this stuff.
Right.
But anyway.
I would like to hold your thought there, and I would like to maybe get a bit into. I know you beautifully explained your career, how you started in the banking world, and then you come with a background around financial services, the risk management, the credit management, and then so your whole, and then how it all drives towards the economic data. So now that we have a whole lot of things going on around, and you were explaining how our Generation X, we've been hearing a lot of these stories about how AI is taking over the world. And now, realistically, for the last 2-3 years, we see with the advent of generative AI and all these things happening. From your perspective, what do you think AI has changed the way economic data is analyzed or applied in the real world government decision making? Because now I want to take the aspect of our today's context is that we want to get into the government side of the things, right? The government efficiency. So how do you think this is getting affected? Like if we have three pillars or three things that are intersecting: economic data, government efficiency, and AI.
Okay. Great question. I think it's better to look at past history where we had transformative changes to our economy due to a new technology, right? So, there was a time when we had nothing but horses and horse-drawn carriages transporting people between cities in the United States. And then all of a sudden, the automobile was invented. We started paving roads to accommodate automobiles and having gas stations built, And, you had, when I was a little kid, most people were doing all of their back office work on paper and putting it in filing cabinets. And then Microsoft came along with Excel and Word and PowerPoint and so on, MS-DOS and all those things. And people began to digitize a lot of these records that had to be stored on paper. Right. And we've been doing that since the 80s over time. And those companies that adopted to this new technology and eliminated waste, redundant processes, because the new technology made them redundant, became the most successful companies, became the most advanced companies, right? It happened again with the iPhone, not that long ago, 10 years ago, 11 years ago it was, where, people were able to get all of their news on the phone and in podcasts and things. So they could get their music on their phone. Think about what happened to the music industry. It got completely wiped out by the iPhone, as did, the Polaroid and Kodak, because they have a camera on the phone that's better than any camera you ever got from Kodak, right? So it completely wiped out whole industries and transformed them. And those people lost their jobs, and they went and they found other jobs. So in my personal view, I think that AI is it's so new, and it's still in its gestation phase. We really don't know who the winners and losers are going to be. I mean, everybody thinks NVIDIA is great, and everybody thinks that OpenAI is great, but who knows if they're going to be around in 5 years? I mean, think about BlackBerry. what the heck happened to BlackBerry after Apple came along with the iPhone? Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember I was a BlackBerry guy and I was like, how could you type on a phone without those little buttons on there? And I'll never use an iPhone. And then obviously that was a stupid thing to say because
right.
the technology changed and everybody moved on and BlackBerry filed bankruptcy, right? That's capitalism. And I
Mm,
think that, where AI comes in now is we're all trying to grapple with this thing and figure it out. And to
mm,
me, the most obvious application that I think impacts markets, impacts economies, is that a lot of stuff that we would outsource,
mm-hmm,
like code writing,
mm-hmm,
use OpenAI to write code, right?
mm-hmm.
Or at least write a shell of the code that you can
Right.
then use and tweak to your needs. There's a lot of that kind of thing. Writing content or letters or copy for marketing purposes, you can use OpenAI to do those things too. And it's pretty powerful and it's
Mm,
learning as it goes. A lot of like more menial tasks um, that can be automated. You can use OpenAI. To me, OpenAI is like basically the next gen of Google. I
right.
use it like
Right.
that
Mm-hmm,
because you can have a
mm-hmm,
conversation with it rather than trying to figure out what you're going to put in Google to get what you want. You just have a
mm-hmm.
conversation with this thing and you're going back and forth and it responds and it gets you closer and closer to the mark, which again is like I see this thing putting Google on a whole other course. I mean, they're not going to be 70% market share anymore. The more and more
Mm-hmm.
people use this thing, right? So let's get back to the point of how does this affect what Doge is doing?
Mm,
So Doge is obviously Elon Musk and his team of superstar nerds.
mm-hmm,
And what we hear is they're applying AI technology to search
mm-hmm.
through payments, to search through processes. And obviously the headlines have been really around what they did with payments, but to your point, some of the things that have come out of this thing is that the government isn't the most efficient organization in the world, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of horse-drawn carriages in the government right now. I mean, apparently the according to what I heard read that Elon posted on X because I look on X.
Mm-hmm.
He said that the software being used for our air traffic control systems is based on code from the mid 1960s, which is
Ah.
like, how could that possibly be? Right?
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
didn't they fix that? So we have incredible opportunity
Right.
to use technology to improve the efficiency of government for any imaginative people who take an interest, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
tons of that. The other thing I heard from Elon that I just was fascinated by to connect to my earlier point about filing cabinets
Mm-hmm.
and the old paper system before Microsoft came with its Excel and the Office products. He said that there was this point early. I mean, it's only been what 6 or 7 weeks since Trump became
Right.
president, but maybe in the first 2 weeks, Elon was saying there's a limit of the number of people
Mm-hmm.
that we can fire in the government every day, and it's 10,000. And the question was,
Mm-hmm.
well, why? Why is it only 10,000? Well, there's this mountain, literally a mountain that was,
Mm-hmm.
underground tunnels were dug into it in the 50s, 1950s,
Oh,
where
right.
they have to
Right.
file paperwork for every person who's terminated, whose employment is terminated. And there's one elevator that goes down this freaking mountain,
Right.
and the maximum number of pages of files they can fit in the elevator in a day and properly file them in these long file
Right.
cabinets
Right.
is 10,000 a day. And everybody was like, haven't we digitized those records yet? Right? It's like, anyway, so I just don't, it's impossible to predict really how much opportunity there is.
Right.
It's
Right.
just like, I mean, we can only rely on what Elon kind of feeds us in his feed, but it sounds like from the way he tells it, he was like, every time you turn around, there's a billion here, there's a billion there. There's just massive savings opportunities everywhere, and a spirit of efficiency coming from the cabinet positions. Howard Lutnick there's another example.
Right.
He's
Right.
the Commerce Secretary,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the points that he raised was because President Trump ordered all of the cabinet secretaries, give me savings, find things that you can do better. And, every 10 years we do the census,
Mm.
which costs $40 billion. And they have to hire millions of guys to go and knock on everybody's door. And so Lutnick says, what other organization in the federal government knocks on everyone's door or goes to their door every day?
Yeah.
Duh, the Postal Service. So he's like, we can save $40 billion by just letting our Postal Service workers do the census. They're already going to people's homes every day. Why not? So, I think AI can only help you to a point.
Right.
I think the best way to think about AI now is to think about it in terms of that Howard Lutnick situation, where you can apply critical thinking and experience and knowledge to the common problems of your business, of government, of, whatever enterprise you're involved in. There's huge opportunities for efficiency. And where this helps is, and I think where Elon it was explaining what AI was able to do in searching through all these payments, the opportunity is more like AI can just accelerate what human research would be able to do on its own. And that's just one application, right? I mean, there's medicine, there's other science, there's travel through, traveling in through space even. I mean, who knows where this could lead? It's a very exciting time, I think.
I would want to go a bit more onto that aspect, right? On the aspect of, I know you gave two beautiful examples. And of course, before getting into the deficit and the other questions around that, I know governments have historically struggled, right? Like with the real-time economic data, how do I use the real-time economic data with the analysis and all, and how that can be leveraged. But now when you have this technology called AI, how you can leverage this technology. So what do you think, how you can leverage this technology to bridge the gap between the actual policy formulation and the actual economic impact? Because these examples that you have provided are beautiful. I know we have this feeling about, hey, I know if I change the way that things are working, a lot of people might lose their jobs and it will have huge economic impact, like what you mentioned. But then on the other hand, you can leverage all these people or their value by retraining them and in different aspects, right? Like how do you think the policy formulation and the actual economic impact can really get married together with the help of AI, or is that even possible?
Well, again, my guiding light, because I am a student of history, and I mentioned as an undergrad, I majored in history. So I tend to see the world and try to figure out what are the parallels to prior periods. And that's why I use the example of the iPhone and Microsoft and cars and so on. Airplanes, that transformed life on Earth when we started using commercial airlines. There's so many examples in American history all the way back to the beginning where we invented things, we created things that changed lives, eliminated jobs, but created new ones. And my belief is it's impossible to know what new industries will be created or jobs. I would guess, at least in terms of the larger picture of our economy, that creativity in the workforce will be of ever increasing value in the coming decades. If you have a child who's very creative, you should cultivate that creativity, because in my personal opinion, there is no way, that AI will ever be able to write a beautiful movie script or a beautiful song. It'll just analyze the past and give you some ideas that, and a creative artist can use that. Like, give me 27 words that rhyme with sky, right? But it's the artist, the creative person, who will have to write that poem or that lyric or that movie or that story, or, how we tell our stories. That's very human. So the kinds of things, like in the past, they would tell you to cultivate things like engineering and STEM, all of which are of high value these days. I think in the future generation, creativity will become much more important. And those who have that creative spark will be of very high value. Why? Because creative people are going to know what to ask these tools and how to help them create that future. What's a city going to look like in the future? How can we rebuild our cities? What's it going to be like? How do we get the bottom 20%? Because this is another problem that hopefully AI can help us solve. But 20% of our nation is living under the poverty level, and we're the richest nation in the world. How is that possible? And what can we do to fix it? So we could take this tool and help us solve the systemic problems that we all have lived with as Americans, and this is a constantly evolving experiment in America. I mean, Raghu, the fact that you're here in our country is a testament to that. We're what we call a melting pot of all these different cultures that come here because they want opportunity, and we have to figure out how to live together in harmony. It's an ever evolving challenge. Can we apply AI to social sciences? Like it's just endless, the possibilities. The only thing that really is the limitation of the human spirit and where we're headed, where we want to go. And I think just based on the history of all these other technologies that came up, yes, jobs will be eliminated, but all these other jobs will be created, right? The economy will continue to grow. And I would say one other thing. I think the era of the large corporation, where you start when you're in college, right out of college, you're 22 and you have your degree and you go to a corporation and you work there for 20 plus years. That is probably not going to be a high value opportunity. I think with AI, entrepreneurship is going to become more and more prevalent. You're going to see companies, I mean, I've read about this, where you're going to see companies with like 2 or 3 guys doing what 200, 300 guys would do pre-AI. As long as those guys know what they're doing, they're going to be able to model and create all these products and services using AI. I can't even imagine where it's going to lead. But anyway, just a few thoughts. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Or
No,
did I
true.
miss anything?
Very true. Very true. I think I like the way you've put it. Like this concept of solopreneurs is arising quite a bit with all these tools out there, where you can have an army of bots or army of AI agents, which can help, and everybody can rethink and how the things can happen. So, and this is going to be even more interesting when we talk in terms of government efficiency, because like you said, our country being the leading technology, innovating the leading technology across the globe and attracting the talent across the globe, right? I think getting the brightest minds here. So we need to think about how we can make this even more better. So this is where the most important topic I really want to bring up is, I know you've wrote a beautiful article on LinkedIn about the deficit, right? The national deficit, which is a very hotly debated topic.
Yeah.
And it keeps on growing. And with AI and automation, I know there are a lot of ways for government to reduce the inefficiencies and improve the fiscal responsibility. I would like to, I'm kind of bringing up an open-ended question, because I know you wrote a beautiful article. Do you want to explain like what is happening there, and what led us here, and how can we, does DOGE help us at least to some extent to come out of that? And can AI on top of that add additional things to get us in the right direction?
Without a doubt. So just for to level set your audience, right?
Right.
The United States has a national deficit of $36 trillion. So it's like well over like 150,000 or something per household, right? It's just insane. If you look at a graph, and maybe in your editing, and when you edit this podcast for publication, you can throw something up on the screen that shows the national deficit from, say, 2000 to 2024, and it's a hockey stick. The only parallel we have, and let me back up. The the way that typically we measure national debts at the nation level is as a percentage of your gross domestic product, or GDP, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, throughout history, once you're over a national debt of 100% of GDP, that's usually the danger zone, where the debt spending you make has less and less of a return in terms of GDP growth. So we're right now at about 118, 119%, I think. You can check me on that, but it's well over 100% now. And that's just US Treasury markets, right? So when the government brings in revenue from taxes every year, then they have a spending plan, and the spending that is above the revenue from taxes is issued as US Treasuries and by the Treasury Department. And so $36 trillion worth of US Treasury bonds is out there in what we call, the public market. And it's just a massive, massive number. And it's been growing, and it particularly started growing post 2020. And so people ask, what's the cause of inflation? And I would point anyone who asks me that question to Milton Friedman. He was a famous economist from the University of Chicago, the late Milton Friedman, who used to say in the 1970s, which was the last time we had a lot of inflation, that inflation is not caused by anything other than too much government spending.
Right.
When the government spends too much money, that is when you get inflation. And what we had as a reaction to COVID was the last 4 years, particularly the Biden administration, passed two massive spending bills, trillion plus, multiple trillions of spending bills, which the CARES Act is the famous one, and that the infrastructure one was another one. And there was all kinds of goodies and giveaways in there. And you can put a direct line between those bills being passed and our nation's inflation rate. Now, inflation is a very, very difficult thing to tame, right? Once it gets going, it's very difficult to get it down to the Fed's targeted 2% level, meaning year over year price increases of no more than 2% is typically what the Federal Reserve targets. And, to back that up a little bit more, the Federal Reserve has what they call the dual mandate, right? Low unemployment and price stability. Price stability meaning no inflation, right? So usually the focus for most of us who are alive today, we don't even remember the last time that we had inflation in the 1970s. Only the boomers may remember that. That was when that price stability thing really became a factor. And we can look at that history to see that, how the Fed reacted to that. They got inflation down by the mid 70s, but then they lowered rates and inflation came back again. But there was a totally different situation in the 70s. It was more related to the oil crisis in the Middle East, and the Iranian Revolution was another part of it, and so on. Totally different situation than now. Now, what the problem is we have a bloated federal government with way too much spending. And then we went completely overboard after 2020.
Right.
And, it was kind of like the Rahm Emanuel quote, never let a crisis go to waste, right? So the Democratic Party just spent it was going out of style, and we're still living in the aftermath of that, right? So where all this ties into DOGE is DOGE's main task, as I understand it from the words of the president and also his executive order creating DOGE, as well as all the commentary we've heard from Elon Musk, as well as other cabinet members, their main mission is to look into the spending of every major government executive branch function,
right,
and find savings and find opportunities to either cut or find efficiencies to lower the national debt, literally lower how much we spend. Now, we still got the 36 trillion, right? That's history that's built up over time. But really what DOGE's mission is to just not let that number go much higher. It's got to stop, and it's got to start coming back down, right? Now, if you look at the economy of the last 4 years, a lot of the world economies, particularly Europe, had basically a recession over that COVID period because they didn't borrow a ton of money. So the United States did. And so a lot of people, a lot of economists think that the reason that the economy did so well, and we had 2 years of 20% S&P and 500 growth the last 2 years, was because of the government spending. If you look at the equation of GDP, gross domestic product, it's, consumption plus investment plus government spending. So the government spending is basically just like a shot of adrenaline into your arm, into the economy, right?
Right.
Now what's happening is the Trump train is saying, whoa, no more government. Whoa, got to slow down on this government spending spree and normalize it. So when Elon was talking about, we want to shoot for 1 trillion of savings, right? Really what he's saying is, and not everybody knows this, but if you go back to 2019, right, and what the government spending level was in 2019, fast forward to now and have just a rate of increase of spend based on population growth in 5 years.
Right.
That would net a 1 trillion cut from where we're spending now. So all the spending that was layered in as a result of these bills that the Democrats passed in the Biden years has shot it way up, and we got to bring it back down. Just to the where we were in 2019 as a percent of population, right? That's why he said 1 trillion. So we're not talking about cutting it deeper than we were at the 2019 level. It's just getting back to 2019. Okay. So DOGE is apparently using AI, sophisticated systems, to analyze where the money goes. And so the very most interesting thing I thought was they figured out that all of the payments, all of the cash flowing out of the government and into all these different agencies and to individuals is from the Treasury. There's like this nexus point where all these trillions flow out every year. And so they went into that system and started analyzing it, and they used AI. If they tried to do that manually, or even with a relational database, or trying to download it using SAS code or something to analyze it, can you imagine how long it would have taken?
Right.
Months, years maybe, to figure it all out. Instead, they were getting answers in a matter of hours using these AI systems, which I can only imagine the sophistication and the quality of the analytics they produce, plus the fact that you have people apparently that have very high IQs and we're working night and day with Elon. So the opportunities are, in my opinion, endless.
Right.
Another thing Milton Friedman kind of said is that a dollar spent in the private sector, I think this was Friedman, might be somebody else, but there's this sort of maxim that a dollar spent in the private sector will get you about $1.10 back. A dollar spent in the government will get you about 50 cents back. In other words, it's better to invest in the private sector. You're going to get more return, because in government, there's so much bureaucracy and so much redundancy that money just tends to disappear in the system. So that's the backdrop for this. And as we've learned over the last few weeks, shocking levels of incompetence, as well as money being spent on really things that I don't know that the American people or even the Congress would have approved if they'd known where the money was going. You have a situation where the executive branch, which, there's 3 branches of government in the United States. I mean, we really have to explain it this way for people because people don't know. But there's 3 branches. That's what the Constitution says. There's an executive branch headed by the president. There's the legislative branch, which is Congress, the House and Senate. And then there's the judicial branch. The executive branch is there to, Congress writes the laws. The judicial branch interprets the laws. And the executive branch enforces the laws. That's their role. And so what has happened really since the World War II period is that the executive branch has grown and grown and grown, and all these agencies have sort of taken on a life of their own. And we're literally beyond the authority of the president. At least that's what it sounds like to me in many instances. And we don't know this for sure, but that's just what we hear from our government telling us, our Trump administration. So basically what Trump has done in this second term that's revolutionary is he's basically said, the Constitution is written this way. I have the authority over all of these agencies of the executive branch, right? They report to me, not to some other place, but to the president, who's the only elected representative in the United States that's elected by the entire nation. There's no other person in that role. He's kind of like, in a way, a kind of a king but
Mm-hmm.
only for 4 years, right?
4 years.
There's a limitation there. It's
Mm-hmm.
those 4 year periods. And he's also hamstrung by the Congress. He's
Mm-hmm.
hamstrung by the judiciary. And so what you're seeing now as things are starting to slow down with DOGE is that things are getting litigated. And
Right.
thankfully, the president has said, I will respect the judiciary. I'll work through the judiciary system.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the kind of the dynamic, right? So there's another thing to consider with our federal government is, and again, to level set for your audience's sake, if you look at the overall spending, and maybe this is another graph that you can put up on the screen that will
Mm-hmm.
visualize what I'm saying, but you can show there's graphs online that show you the percent of total federal spending, right?
Mm-hmm.
The lion's share of our federal government's spending is benefits, namely Medicare, Medicaid,
Mm-hmm.
healthcare for
Mm-hmm.
everybody over 65 and anybody else who's getting Medicare or Medicaid, and then Social Security,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is, this social safety net passed by President Roosevelt in, I think,
Roosevelt, yeah.
1932 or 33.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is defense, national defense.
Right.
The other problem with our moment now is there's a fourth item in there that's growing bigger and bigger, which
Right.
is interest on the national debt. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
right now, I believe the interest on the national debt is actually higher than defense spending. So this defense spending is like 800, 900 billion a year. The
Yeah.
interest on the debt is like 1 trillion a year.
Close to $1 trillion. Yeah.
Now, the other thing to think about, think about the interest and how low the interest was post 2008 when the Fed lowered Fed funds down to 25 basis points, right?
Right.
So I think a lot of the reason this problem didn't come up in the 15 years from '08 until the 2020 crisis, right? Whatever that was, so many years, is because the rates were so low, the interest payments remained low,
Very low.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Fed knew if they raised rates, all they were doing was increasing the national debt even more because of the interest, right?
Right.
So the Fed had a very difficult job because they were trying to manage through this period of like the banking crisis of '08 and stabilizing housing markets. And then they had Democrats that wanted to spend a lot of money and they had to there was all this pressure against them raising rates. But what we had with that low rate period was very abnormal, and it caused, I think, a lot of the problems that we have today were caused by Fed policy. Now, the reason I'm kind of explaining this larger backdrop
Mm-hmm.
is because I want you to understand these are all human problems.
True.
They're not things that can be fixed by a computer. They can only be fixed by humans. We have to, and again, this gets back to my point about AI being a tool.
Right.
It's like, when man invented the hammer, we learned how to use the hammer to hammer nails and build things, right? And
Right.
when man invented a wrench, we figured out how to use that to help us, and other tools that we've created over the years, like the iPhone and other tools. And
Right.
AI is another tool. And so what's happening now with everybody around the world that's in this game, we're all trying to figure out how to use this tool, how to
Yeah.
use it to optimize systems and processes and save money and increase value and all those fun things that a capitalist economy does. So
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's too early. I'll go back to the automobile thing. If you go back to I don't know, maybe 1920 or 1919,
Right.
I think there were like over 100 auto companies building
Yeah.
cars.
Right.
And it was impossible to know who was going to be the winner,
Yeah.
right? General Motors was nearly going to file bankruptcy at one point. I remember reading
Right.
about this.
Mm.
I live in Delaware, so the DuPont family is a famous family that lives here and is extremely wealthy. And what we've learned over the years is the reason the DuPonts are so wealthy is because Pierre DuPont became the chairman of General Motors when they were on the ropes. And he instituted all these financial practices, and General Motors by 1950 became the largest corporation in the world, right? That's America. That's how things,
That's
you
how
need
things, yeah.
leadership, vision, those are the things that create real value. But you also want those leaders to understand how these tools can help you create that value, right? So,
Right.
So in terms of the government and the opportunity that this represents, to me, what I'm most excited about is the fact that Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, at least as far as we know,
Right. Right.
but at least on paper and based on his, the wealth in his incredible companies, Tesla and SpaceX and Starlink and so on,
Right, right.
has decided for whatever reason to use his immense knowledge and immense connections in the
Right,
Silicon Valley world to help improve the efficiency of our government
right.
for obvious to him reasons, right? My
Hmm.
understanding of his reasons are he feels that the United States is really the only true leader of the world in terms of political leadership that
Hmm.
could lead him to his ultimate goal, which is to build a city on Mars, I believe. It's his big
Right,
plan.
right,
So
right.
he thinks that we need to become an interplanetary species, right?
Mm, mm,
And we need to grow our footprint around the galaxy. That's all
right.
ultimately. And again, that sounds like science fiction, but I don't think it is to him. To him, it's like a reality, and he wants to do it, but he knows he can't do it by himself. He needs the United States to do it. And I think he also brings all of this energy coming from the titans of Silicon Valley.
Hmm.
Mark Anderson of Anderson
Right,
Horowitz,
right,
Jeff Bezos,
right.
of Amazon. These are titans of Silicon Valley coming to the table to help make our government work better. And God knows it doesn't work that well. I mean, look at the poor people of California with the terrible fires where
Right,
these
right.
they pay the highest level of taxes almost in the entire United
Yeah,
States. And they
yeah.
and the people are shouting, "What do we get for all of our taxes? We give them all this money, and what do we get for it? We get nothing." That's the way people are talking about it. And that's disturbing.
It's
If
very
I'm the
disturbing.
government now,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how can I use AI to help me
Make things
help
better. Yeah,
those
yeah,
people when
yeah,
they're in trouble,
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
tons and tons of opportunity to be unleashed here, I think,
I think,
in
Tommy,
the
you
government sector.
gave a very good history lesson, I would say, explaining how we came here. And I really appreciate that, giving that complete background and how Doge can, and what is the actual mission of Doge, and how things can get better if we can implement it in the right way. And
Yeah.
obviously, AI tools, AI is again one such tool which can help uh, get us there. And like some of the quotes that you mentioned about Elon, I think I was listening into one of the other podcasts where he was talking about saying that maybe this is the only time we have as a human species where technology has come to that extent. And then because going forward, I think the population is on a decline. So we need to have
Mm.
some X amount of population, X amount of technology, so that you can make human beings interplanetary species. Or I think there was this beautiful podcast on Joe Rogan show I was listening in.
Mm.
So I think right, and like you rightfully said, I think we got all the right ingredients in. But do you think I'm just trying to throw this question? I know
Mm.
we are trying to understand. Do you think, are there any global examples out there of AI being successfully deployed to optimize government spending and operations? It doesn't need to be a democracy kind of a country, but I think do you? I know this is a tough question, but do you think, are there some governments there who are leveraging AI better? Maybe we can use some lessons from them. What do you think?
At least based on the current technology, the AI is so cutting edge. I think if there's anywhere in the world
Mm,
where it may be being used is in China.
mm,
I just don't know how. And the reason I think of China is just because of the deep seek
right, right.
situation. And again, I think we're unleashing the animal spirits with the new administration. What my understanding, and I think I heard this, I might have heard this on Rogan. I know I heard it
Mm.
though, is no, it was Mark Anderson
Mark Edison,
being
A16Z.
interviewed by Joe
Mm.
Rogan, I believe.
Oh, Joe
And
Rogan show. Okay.
and
Mm,
what Anderson said was that in the Biden years, these administration officials came out to Silicon Valley and met with the titans, the five biggest AI focused companies.
right.
And they basically said, you five companies are going to be the only ones doing AI. And we want to do that because we want to keep it under control. We want to manage it. And you
Mm,
guys are going to be the five companies. And what Anderson said was, he was like, that's impossible,
mm,
right? And because you can't innovate when you stifle it and you block all these other. I mean, look what DeepSeek did, right?
Right.
The
Right.
Wright brothers, who invented flight, were
Right.
bicycle mechanics trying to go for this big award that was being offered, right?
Yeah.
Anybody who can create a flying machine is going to get $1 million, right? So all these big corporations were trying to create a plane, but it was these bicycle mechanics from Ohio who went down to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and tested out their flying machine in this amazing wing shape that they created, who invented flight, right? So you can't have innovation without letting the little guy take swings at it, right? And DeepSeek, I think, although it's very difficult to know with China whether the government was involved, because of the timing of it, it could have been almost like a kind of an economic attack.
Right.
But
Right.
the fact that DeepSeek has happened has completely changed the picture of AI. And I want to go
Right.
over this too, because this is critical for people to understand.
Mm.
And it's a market-based thing that actually could impact the S&P 500. So let me see if I can wind this story together for you. For the last 2 years, okay, if you look at the S&P 500, the growth, it's been 20% a year. Hey, sounds great, right? If you own an index fund, you just made 20%. But that's 500 companies, okay? The so-called Magnificent Seven, which is the seven largest companies, right?
Right.
And I may forget one, but it's Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, Nvidia, uh,
Apple, Google.
Apple, Google, Microsoft, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I may have said Microsoft twice. Anyway,
And Facebook, I think
seven
the other one.
companies,
Yeah.
right, are responsible for all of that growth.
Right.
If you look
Right.
at the other 493 companies, so if the S&P 493, taking out the Magnificent Seven, earned 0% for the last 2 years.
True.
Zero. Even many of them fell in value. Some of them went up, but overall, the 493 are at zero.
Right.
And the Mag 7 story, the story that was building that value into these stock prices, was that these companies were in the commanding position of AI development.
Mm-hmm.
And they all were saying the same thing. We need to build these massive data centers. We need to build massive power plants because we need all this energy that AI needs to consume to do the work that, OpenAI does and all these other little AI Grok does at X and so on.
Right.
So the big revolution of DeepSeek was it uses like 10% of the power that OpenAI uses to do the same functions. In fact, some of the functions were tested as being better. You could probably tell me better than this. I'm just putting it in the position of the market.
Right.
So, in other words, this Chinese concern using NVIDIA chips that were apparently outdated were able to create algorithms underneath this AI tool.
Right.
As I understand it, it's like every time you run something in OpenAI, it looks through the entire file cabinet of AI to get to what it needs. What DeepSeek did was it created, based on your query, it creates almost like a library. It creates sections of the library. I mean, think of the Dewey Decimal System. There's section 100, 200, 300, and so on. And it would just go, okay, first let's search the subject, then do the filing check.
Right.
And by doing that, again, I'm oversimplifying, but that's what I read. That saves 90% of the power requirement. So now this whole story about all this capital spending at the Magnificent Seven that they're going to need to build power plants and have data centers, well, they're going to need 1/10 of it. Everybody's going to take DeepSeek stuff and apply it. Apparently, OpenAI already has. And they're not going to need as much of what they were telling everyone because all this growth was going to give them capital to invest. Now they don't need to because DeepSeek has created this new advancement in the tool. So that's what I mean about like 100 auto companies turning into 7 auto companies. There's there needs to be a period of innovation and testing in order to get to the value that's going to be created by these tools. And so my word of warning is that the S&P 500 is kind of reacting to this news. And it might be a bumpy year with that plus all the other stuff going on.
Right.
And again, that's just, I think it's just the way AI is the life cycle of this new technology We're
Mm,
very
mm.
much in the early stages. I mean, to use a baseball analogy, we're probably in about the first or second inning of the game. We're not even close to the ninth inning and the end of the game. So a lot of uncertainty. And like I said, think of BlackBerry versus
Right,
Apple
right.
iPhone, you know.
Mm, mhm.
Think of Google versus
Ah,
ChatGPT. Again,
right,
I think of ChatGPT as like a better version of Google. And the more and more people figure that out, the less and less valuable Google's going to be. You know what I mean?
right, right.
Unless they adapt. So anyway, just a
Beautiful,
few,
beautiful.
does that
Yes,
answer?
yes, yes. I think you beautifully laid out the picture. But before I go into the final question, I have one other interesting question I wanted to ask. I know there are major hurdles in AI adoption within the government entities. How do you think they can be overcome, or do you think we are in that stage that there will be a lot of hurdles in these different government entities for this leveraging the AI adoption, or and how this can be overcome?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And, you know, I think that, the Doge phenomenon shot out at the world like a cannon
Mm,
first 2 or 3 weeks of the presidency. And you feel that kind of getting dialed back a bit. It's slowing down. It's being slowed down by these bureaucracies finally reacting to this rapid
mm,
change. They're filing lawsuits, and the president has said he's going to respect the judiciary, which is going to slow it down even more. And yet he still supports Musk. So, the risk here that could slow this all down is if, whenever any new president comes in, they've got all these great ideas, right?
yeah.
And they want to do new things, but then history starts to take over. They start reacting to the things that happen that they must confront,
Right.
whether it's, some economic crisis or some war or some outbreak or whatever. I mean, well, I'd like to think that won't happen and that the president and his cabinet can continue to drive toward efficiency. I think
Mm-hmm.
they all are definitely in spirit on that road. But at the end of the day, when it comes back to that 36 trillion
36 trillion. Yep.
of
Yep.
debt, the only way we're going to put any sizable dent in it is if we, you know, dig into Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. There's just no other way because that's where the most of the government money is going in
Mm-hmm.
percentage terms. And it's a growing number because the baby boomers are getting older. They're collecting these entitlements
Yep.
and the costs just keep going up and up and up. And
Mm.
I remember Paul Ryan talking about this 15 years ago,
True.
like it's just not going to stop unless some kind of structural change occurs. Now, I'm a very optimistic person, and I think the fact that Robert Kennedy Jr. is at the
Yeah.
HHS, the Human
Yeah.
Services,
Yeah.
could provide opportunity, particularly if he's able to raise the bar of the overall health of our nation and our citizens. If we
Mm.
eat more healthy food, and we avoid the over pharma. We've got. I mean, I've read the statistics. I've heard
Right.
them that
Right.
we take more drugs, than any other nation. Our children are medicated more than any other children in the world, and yet we have worse health outcomes, and our life expectancy is dropping, and so on and so forth. There's a
Mm.
national obesity epidemic. If there's anything that can be done from that side to
Mm.
improve the health of our nation, to get Americans going again and getting healthy, that's naturally going to just reduce healthcare spending, right? Because
Right.
people will get less sick. So, you know,
Right.
that's my guess on the health and the Medicare Medicaid front is that we're hopeful that what Secretary Kennedy can do and the new head of the FDA, the new head of National Institute of Health can do with sound science to improve the overall health of our nation. I mean, some of the statistics that gets cited are just overwhelming. Like the one that gets quoted often about autism,
Mm-hmm.
something
Mm-hmm.
like in 2000 and I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it's like in the year 2000, 1 in 1,500 children born had
Right.
autism, and now it's 1 in 36, which is
Yes.
like,
Yes. That.
okay, what's happened between 2000 and now to cause this incredible increase
Yeah.
in autism, right? Something must be the cause. Now, everybody's got their theories and they think it's vaccines or they think it's this or they think it's that. but it's at least worth exploring scientifically to get
Yeah.
to an answer, and freedom of inquiry and no interference from pharmaceutical companies. Let us just find out what's going on, right? All of that type of activity could have a huge positive impact on the cost of healthcare, right?
Right.
If there's less people sick, there's less need for heart surgeries and cancer treatments and so on because less people will be sick, right? And then from Social Security standpoint, you know, it sounds like, at least based on what DOGE has told us, that the AI has been applied to Social Security, at least in a preliminary fashion. You heard the president in the State of the Union
Right.
talking
Right.
about people over 160 years old in the system. How is that? And, the press is like, well, who are these people? What's going on? 3 million people between the ages of 120 and 130. Where are these people? What are their names? And I honestly,
Right.
my opinion is Trump is not put, he announced that in the State of the Union as a
Right.
warning.
Yeah.
People that have been collecting checks on behalf of their grandparents or great grandparents
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
these years.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to arrest them. He wants to warn them
Want
and
them.
say,
Yes.
stop.
Stop.
If
Yeah.
you don't stop, I'm gonna come after you, because there's a lot of people, it seems like, who are cheating the Joe taxpayers collecting those checks. If you clean out all those millions of people who've been receiving checks in the United States and overseas, apparently,
Overseas too. Yeah.
through various tricks,
Tricks and programs. Yep. Yeah.
then you could possibly significantly reduce the burden on the taxpayers, right?
Right. Right.
Um, that's really the fascinating thing to me right now is everybody's talking about, oh, get rid of the IRS. We're going to have tariffs, blah, blah, blah. I don't think so. I mean, I think the American people are going to pay taxes. Maybe
Right.
we'll pay a little bit less.
Right.
Um, and the tariff thing, to me, he's just using that as a weapon for
True.
negotiations.
True. True.
I don't think it's going to become like I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. That's the fun part, is it's totally unpredictable to know. But I guess what I'm saying is like, how does AI fit into all this?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think what AI is doing is it's allowing these decisions to come to light much more quickly. You don't need
Much
to
more
do
quick.
2 years of research and write a white paper that's peer reviewed to
Right.
get to these conclusions that end up just dropping into a bucket in a bureaucracy somewhere that nothing ever gets done with. These things are happening so quickly, and these discoveries are happening rapidly because of application of these tools, these artificial intelligence tools, which brings us all new information. Then we all react, and then what do we do now, right?
Right. Right.
So it's it's fascinating, and it's really, like, I would call it the greatest show on earth, is trying to figure out what's going to happen next with the American government, with what's DOGE is doing, with what we can do to balance our budget. I mean, Trump even said he wants to balance the budget. That
Right.
would be a real stretch. The last time we balanced the budget was in the President Clinton years.
Clinton years, 90s, I believe, right? 92 or
Yeah,
96. Yeah.
when the Republicans took over the House
Right.
and Newt Gingrich became the Speaker of the House with his
Yeah.
contract for America, which main point was they wanted to balance the budget. But the
Yeah.
driving force was that bond rates were going way, 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 way up, borrowing rates on the
Right.
long end of the curve, because they were worried about the debt. So they balanced the budget, the bond rates came back down. Interestingly enough, that's another big Trump policy that has implications, is the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, has said, we want the 10-year Treasury to drop big time,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
200 basis points or more. And what that would do is it's directly tied to the 30-year mortgage rate. I mean, imagine if the mortgage
Right.
rate, which is around 7, it's dropped down to, I think it's already dropped 50 basis points to 6.5 national average. You get that down to like 480, you're going to have
Yeah.
a lot of churn and a lot of sudden growth in the housing market, which housing market is usually the largest asset of most American
True.
taxpayers own, even more than their stock portfolios and so on. So the housing market is literally frozen in place because of how high the rates are. And there's just all this pent up opportunity there if rates get low enough. So again, there's so much moving right now. If you're a
Yeah.
CEO
Yeah.
of a company, there's so much uncertainty. It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
impossible to make a decision about a capital allocation or anything. Other than like AI, we got to do AI, we got to do that. Anything else, it's like, I don't know if I'm going to build that building. I don't know if I'm going to expand or acquire another company because I just don't know what's going on with interest rates, with
Right.
geopolitics, anything. It's a fascinating time to be alive, I think.
Yep,
So,
yep, definitely. I think I know it's a great conversation that I'm having with you. I know we're a little over an hour, but I would like to come to this one. The interesting question, I call this the extra AI question, the $1,000,000 or the $1 billion question.
oh
If
boy.
you had, if you had to propose, again, it's a hypothetical question, right? I think if you had
Okay.
to propose an AI-driven strategy to improve public sector efficiency in the next 3 to 5 years, what would that look like? I think maybe you can tell in one word or whichever way you want to tell. Of course, we had been talking about Doge. You could even say it is Doge, but I think I want to bring your thoughts into that.
I think I would propose two areas. The
Mm,
most inefficient and redundant parts of our government are, in
mhm.
terms of the total cost, are
Right.
Social Security and Medicare.
Mm, mm.
Um, and healthcare is so complicated.
Yeah.
There's so many factors, so many variables in that data set. It's almost impossible. And like I said, what Health and Human Services is doing and improving public health could be a huge, huge win there. But I just think in terms of how we deliver care
Mhm.
is fundamentally broken, and applying AI to the delivery of healthcare
Okay.
could be revolutionary because it's a mess, right? The way that we pay for healthcare with
Mm,
insurance companies who are incentivized to not pay the
right.
hospitals and the providers, and they're always rejecting claims, and then they got to go back and try and get the claims reapproved and so on. It's a real mess. And, improving the technologies that are used to treat things like cancer and such, there's improvement opportunities there, and there's improvement in the delivery and improvement in the way that we go inpatient versus outpatient. And then, I mean, it's just, there's so much possibility to improve healthcare in our
Mm,
nation, and if we could apply AI to that, that would be amazing. And then on the other thing, it's the Social Security,
right.
and I think that Elon's getting there and with his group,
Mhm.
but it just seems to me there's probably quite a bit of abuse in the system.
Right.
And we could use AI to sort of root that out and say, if you're receiving Social Security disability
Mm, mm.
and yet you're on a basketball court playing basketball with your friends, maybe you shouldn't be receiving checks, right? Things
Right.
like the abuse of this system.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to know. You only have stories and hearsay, and then you're hearing these sensational stories about people of, 100, 250 years old getting checked. Obviously, that's impossible, right?
Right.
If
Right.
if we can apply AI to those things, I think that would be amazing. And we haven't even gotten to the Pentagon yet. I think what Elon and the Doge team did with the US aid and
Mhm.
mapping out all of these payments going to all these different places, being able to apply that to the Pentagon, I can't even imagine the savings they're gonna find, and the abuse of spending. It's just, you just hope that they can get there if
Right.
they have enough time. Elon eventually is going to go, I got to get back to my companies now.
Yeah. Yeah.
My Tesla stock's down 20%. I'm sorry, I got to go, and he's just going to
Right.
leave. And this feels like a job that will take 12 years,
Mm.
not 4 or
Not
even,
for you.
4 months. What I heard is that Musk basically cleared his calendar for 4 months. And
Mm.
so he's all in for 4 months. And once he gets to the end of the fourth month, he's just going to go back to his
Mm.
jobs, I guess. But
Right.
we'll see what happens. It's fascinating. I hope that answers your question. It's a
Yeah.
bit
Yeah. Yeah. No, beautiful. I
repeated
think
myself, but I'm just really excited about the opportunities for healthcare improvement and also Social
Social
Security
security.
efficiency.
Yeah. Those are the
So,
two very important things that you brought up. I know, just for the record, I think we are recording this in the first week of March, and this will go live sometime in April. Just to let the audience know. Uh, Thanks for your time, Tommy. Any closing remarks or that you would, are key insights that you would like to give to our audience about the future of AI in government operations across the globe, from your coming back from your economic policies background and other things?
Well, first, let me just say thank you so much. It's been an honor to be here and to join you today. And I appreciate the chance to share my thoughts. And I'm really excited about the future. I think a lot of people are scared, as I said earlier, because of so many artists warned us as we grew up in this world about technology. But really what you need to be worried about is humanity and how humanity uses this technology. That's what we have to protect against, right? It's our own human ability to sin and to do evil things with this technology. That's really what we got to protect ourselves against. And I'm optimistic that we can do that, and that we will do that, and that the future will be far more bright as a result of the application of this incredible new technology. It's like, what do they call it? The fourth industrial revolution or something?
Right.
I think that's definitely possible. Can you imagine what life will be like in 10 years? Just thinking ahead in 10 years, like, where will we be in 10 years? And how will we live differently than we do now? And what will AI bring to that table? Will we have robots cleaning our homes for us or cleaning the bathroom? My wife just bugged me an hour or so ago saying, could you please clean our bathroom? It needs to be cleaned. And that's somehow become my job. And I really love it if there was some kind of robot who could do it for me, because it's a lot of work and it's kind of stinky and smelly and all that, But those are the types of things you go, well, who knows? 100 years ago, people used to have to hand wash their clothes. Now we have washing machines, So that's the kind of thing that excites me. There's just massive opportunity here for those who are bold and imaginative. And I'm an optimist. So hope that's the nice closing thought for everyone.
Great closing, and great talking with you, Tommy. Thanks for your time.
Likewise. Thank you, Raghu, very much.
As we wrap up this powerful premiere of season 13, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Tommy Esposito for joining us today. Tommy, your insights into how AI can reshape economic policy, reduce government inefficiency, and spark meaningful change in the public sector have been both eye-opening and inspiring. It's voices like yours that make these conversations matter. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your passion, and your vision for a more efficient and intelligent government. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Whether you're a policymaker, a data scientist, an AI enthusiast, or simply a curious mind, you're part of this journey to explore where AI is taking us next. Stay with us this season as we continue to bring you riveting episodes, bold voices, and breakthrough thinking at the intersection of AI, business, and society. Until next time, happy predicting the future with AI technologies, and stay XTraw